Welcome to the Cultures Healing Podcast, brought to you by Checking In. At Checking In, we create customized wellness apps for First Nations communities, guided by relationship, trust, and community knowledge. We're also grateful to share our Pathways to Healing tool, which supports frontline and support staff in helping community members access healing houses more quickly and with care. To learn more about our work, please visit www.checkingin.co. Thank you for being here and for spending time with us. I hope you enjoy the episode. Aichka. Aichquel siapnet siaya, antapat hokoletsa, nitstaminis, halalt, kawitsin, liaxin. Hello, everyone. My traditional name is Hokoletsa. My English name is George Harris Jr., and I'm calling you today from my home here in Staminis. This is the community that my father is from. This is the community that my mother married into, and this is the community that my siblings and I were raised in. I belong to George Harris Sr. and my late mother, Sylvia Harris. And my grandparents from my father's side of my family are the late Lawrence and Irene Harris. And my grandparents from my mother's side of my family are the late Bernard and Nora George. And my familial connections to Halalt come from my mother Sylvia and my grandmother Nora. And my familial connections to Cowitson come from my grandfather Bernard. Through both sides of my family, I have familial connections to Liaxin. And I have the honor and privilege of being able to carry the name Hokoletsa. That's a name that's been passed down from generation to generation throughout my family. And I have that honor to carry that name along with my father, as well as a few other family members. And thank you so much for joining us here today. And once again, my name is Hokoletsa, and I am the host of the Cultures Healing Podcast. And today I have the honor and privilege of being able to share this space with my dear chosen family, Leah. And, our families go way back. And, I'm really honored to be able to share this space with her. And I'd like to open the floor for Leah to introduce herself to you all. Aichka.
Hajkasiam. I'd in the wild. It's a good day today. Anthasitsia ama e Sialia. My name is Leah George-Wilson, and those are my ancestral names. Sitsia ama is my Tsleil-Waututh name, and Sialia is my Squamish name. My parents are Syntholia and late hereditary chief Slahot Iggy George. My grandparents are late Ansakalot, Lillian George, and late John L. George, hereditary chief, and as well as Ernie N. George. My mom's parents are late Caroline Josephine Trimble. She's actually Sunamo and Niskat. And my late grandfather is Tsleil-Waututh, late Stan Joseph from Squamish Nation. I live here in Tsleil-Waututh, where my dad's people are from, and I have a husband from Alabama. He has Creek Indian in him, and we have a daughter together, Kalila Selquilia Sitsiama. And yes, I have the honor of being absorbed into the Harris family a number of different ways, going all the way back to my grandfather and George's grandfather. and I'm happy to be here.
Hmm. HKCM. Yeah, absolutely love having the ability to have some amazing conversations with the people that I truly love and get the opportunity to share some amazing conversations with all of these amazing people on the podcast here. And so yeah, I'd love to jump into it and share some of the stories that we carry and then the knowledge that you carry, Leah. And, taking a look into our podcast and we were very intentional with the name that we chose. Culture is healing. Is something that really means a lot to me. Means a lot to the work that we do here at Checking In, as well as um, culture is healing is something that is shared in our communities quite frequently. And I have that very like strong belief. It's not just a saying. It's not just a slogan. It's definitely a way of being for our people, and it's our culture that brings healing to us. And when I talk about and share, what culture's healing is, when I say that, what does that mean to you, Leah?
It really resonates with me because in our Huelma worlds, our indigenous world, culture is healing. And we know from the experiences of our parents and our grandparents that had to attend residential school where so much of our culture, our own humanity was denied from them, from not being able to have long hair, being punished to speak our languages, not having enough not having enough food, and not feeling the love around them every day. Because growing up in our communities, that's what you feel. You feel taken care of and you feel the love every day. So having generations of our people having been denied that and then sent back into our communities without any proper connection, I mean, people were ripe for all of the addictions and trauma that arose from that. And the way through it, as we've seen in so many ways, is that it is our cultures that will heal us. And I think that our people have felt that way for generations. The issue, of course, has been the colonization that worked so hard to separate us from not only our culture and our land, but also each other. So it's like the perfect storm for all of the atrocities that have happened to our people, and our answer has been culture.
Mm. Wachka. Yeah, I think it's truly amazing, being able to, reconnect with our language and our culture. And even hearing you mentioning, the the strong disconnect that was attempted to, really, as they say, trying to remove the the Indian from within. And I was just when I was sharing with you earlier, I had the opportunity to drive my father on Friday down to Samanat. On our drive down, we he was mentioning, um, he was really encouraged and wants to attend, some of the jam sessions that are happening around all of Coast Salish territory. Seeing he is saying, he really loves seeing our young people, being able to partake in our songs and dances, and you know, because that's something that he didn't really get to do as a child.
Mhm.
And so that was really, a really touching moment for me to be able to hear that from my father. And it's really, really amazing to see the generations to come after being able to engage in our traditional ways. And I think it's going to bring some amazing healing for our people as we continue to move forward and continue to press into that understanding of who we are and where we come from. And so I look forward to seeing what the next generations have in store, and I look forward to seeing the journey and the healing that comes from that cultural and engagement.
Mhm.
And as we're kind of take that deeper dive into our conversation, um, I was gonna ask you, thinking of culture and how we're able to engage in our traditional ways of being. Are there any um, you know ceremonies or cultural activities that you've had the opportunity to partake in or witness that hold a special place in your heart?
Yes. When Clelo finished high school and was getting ready to go to university out of the country, we I talked to my parents and I really wanted her to have a name before she went. So I wanted to have a way to remind her about who she is and where she comes from. So my parents, well, they had two names in mind for her. One, my uncle wanted her to carry the female version of his name, Salqualum, so she received Salqualia, and then I shared my name with her. And my parents thought, well, they're naming one grandchild and they have 11. So we decided we'd open it up and name all of them. And that was a lot of work, making sure we had the right names for each child. And then we included our my dad's late brother, his grandchildren, because they had lost their dad and my dad's brother was gone. So we invited them to join so they could be named. And then a couple of other nieces and nephews that were special to our mom and dad got invited to join as well. So they're like 17 or something crazy. And we used the shomoksis, we used the rattle because our families come from that. And it was really powerful when all the singers came. They were like all amazed at how many names and how many people there were there, but it all went so beautifully. It was really good. And in the community, if the family comes from the mass, then they do the sacred mass work in the morning of the service. And we see that regular, and that's always uplifting. But it's always beautiful when you see mask ceremony when it's a more uplifting time, like a wedding. And we were happy to be invited to your Uncle Tom's wedding to Elaine, and that was beautiful. And we had the opportunity to also be invited for when you brushed off your mom a few years ago with the mask. And those are always so important ceremonies to witness, rites to witness, because as you know, not everybody comes from the mask and you have to belong to use it. And in some of our ways, women don't speak to the work, but in some cases they do. So I have been honored by your family, Hokulitsa, by your family, to speak at a couple of different works. And that has been so special, so heartwarming, so honoring, such an honoring feeling to know that your family would trust me in being able to speak to the work and say things to the family. And I can never do it without crying because it's such an feeling in emotional in the sense that I can feel all the love and I can feel the love coming out in the words because I know that with your family, often those aren't my words. Those are, I'm just channeling. And I'm always so honored and I have been honored by your family a few times. And that makes me feel proud that, that your family trusts us in that way. And being in those kinds of ceremonies, it's such a good connection. Every time you see the mask, it always makes you feel good, even when it's a sad time, because you know they're doing their work, helping our loved ones go to the other side. It's so important. And your Uncle Ray actually said to me once that we're in a museum and we were looking at some of the artifacts that are being held at the museums and all the different First Nations ceremonial objects are there, and talked about how these masks are living and they're not supposed to be just hanging up on a wall. Like they have a purpose, they have a job to do. And in some cultures, their connection isn't how do I say he said essentially that they're jealous of what we have as Kwamok people because they don't have the same kind of connection to their masks and to the spirit in all of that work that we do. And every time you're in any kind of ceremony, you can really feel the spirit, and I understand what he means. And I'm thankful that there's someone there to help us understand.
Yeah, Haichka. Yeah, thank you for sharing. Yeah, it's amazing to see, like, when we have those opportunities to witness all of that amazing work, and like you're saying, like feeling that power that comes from the work that is being carried out is awesome. And thinking about, yeah, Uncle Tom's work that day was really powerful, and I remember him, passing on his mask to his grandson Julian, and that was a powerful moment to witness. Um, I know I was bawling my eyes out to watch that, that passing on of the mask and stuff. That was very powerful to for me, as the one of the loved ones of Uncle Tom, and being able there to support and witness that, and then being able to also be there to witness the lifelong relationship that Uncle Tom and Auntie Elaine have. They've been together for quite a while, and taking that step forward to acknowledge their love for each other publicly was really cool and awesome to see. And I know, um thinking about some of the work that I got to do that day with, my dad had it set in his heart that he wanted to sing to Uncle Tom and Auntie Elaine his honor and celebration song. And so he went and asked Sister Monica if it was okay if we sang, and she said, "Oh, for sure." And so, when they were still blanketed and still had their ceremonial blankets on, we got to sing to them, and it was really, I felt, that Ait Squallowins, those good feelings, and that was really because Uncle Tom, he holds such a special place in my heart, and it was really cool to be able to have a small part in his special day with Auntie Elaine. So,
Mhm. Yeah, that was a really beautiful day, and when, I realized that was his grandson that was getting his mask, like, I cried too. It was so fitting and so important for that kind of work to carry on while in in our lifetime. You know, so many times things like that happen, it happens after, somebody's gone, and which is good still that, the things don't get lost, but how amazing was that for Tom to see his mask going around with his grandson? That must have been, well, you could see him. I watched him watch the grandson. It was beautiful.
that was powerful for sure. Yeah, and I know there was quite a few people in our family that were feeling those emotions of being proud, and I know Uncle Tom was kind of saying his goodbyes to that part of his life because he'd carried it for so long, and he's his it was his time to pass it on, and it couldn't have been done in a more fitting way.
Yeah,
It was a very good celebration day. So yeah, that was great.
it
Yeah,
was
it
for
was,
sure.
and thinking about too, like there were so many people that we got to see and that were invited, and got to see you and Kalila, and I know Gabe came over, and it was really just a fun day to be able just to be around all the people that we love, and
Mhm.
thinking about what you were saying too, those some of those connections were sometimes a little bit harder to keep up in the world, and now we're have those opportunities to remain connected, and we're carrying forward our traditional ways of our people, and we're very our Coast Salish people were very much connected to one another, and I was hearing my father share um you know, a lot of times when he talks, like he talks about the pride that our people carry in our ceremony, and in our language and our songs, and he says there's quite a few of our traditional homes all up and down the coast, even up into um, talking about the Stolo territory, and he's like, I can go to any one of those homes, and I'll feel like home because the way that our people we carry ourselves, and how we engage in our culture, and yeah, it's just really cool to see and to hear, and especially thinking about Uncle Tom's work and all the people that are close to him and Auntie Elaine all coming together to celebrate. It was a beautiful day.
Mhm. Lovely.
Yeah. And as we're, taking a look into, some of those ceremonies and teachings that have been passed on, um, undoubtedly you've had the opportunity to have some amazing um, elders and teachers and mentors in your life. Um, what are some of those teachings that have been passed on to you that really help guide you in your day to day walk?
I was really lucky to grow up with grandparents that we would see every weekend. They lived just down the road from us, and we spent a lot of time with them, and we heard a lot of the, stories about our old people and how, what happened here at Tsleil-Waututh. And the one thing that really got drilled into us is to be proud of who we are and to know who we are and to know that we're not nobody, we're somebody. And my mom's mom, on her second marriage, she married and ended up living up here at Tsleil-Waututh for a few years. And it was nice to be able to see her regularly as well, because her family, her mom was Lydia Brown from Snuneymuxw, and her dad was William Trimble from Kincolith. So she had really different experience growing up compared to, all the other grandparents, because she grew up in the city. But always they were connected to Snuneymuxw, so she knew about Big House, even though she lived in the city. And she married really quite young at Squamish. And in those days, our culture was very much underground, and they didn't practice Sioux here on the mainland like they were still able to do on the island. So when in but in Musqueam, they always held on in Musqueam. But over here in North Vancouver, that's where the missionaries were, right? They built the big mission here in North Vancouver, so there was not very much opportunity for our Sioux to keep going. But on Capilano Reserve over in West Vancouver, it's where it kind of was underground, I think. I think they say it was sleeping. And they built a big house in the 60s, I think it was. And our grandmother's brother, Ed Brown, came over, Yetzetsa, came over from Snuneymuxw, and he helped the revitalization of that part of our culture here in the Lower Mainland, but also up in the Fraser Valley, because his two brothers from Musqueam, Simlano, and Siamnamit, all three of them went up into the Fraser Valley and they helped revitalize, and they taught people how to do all the things that in our families that they had the rights to practice. So we can see how important a role our elders and our old people play in our communities. And I did get to know our uncles Walker and Vince, uh, Simnamit and Simlano, but Uncle Ed, he was passed away by the time I was, I don't know, maybe 10 or something. So I only have a couple memories of him, but those are people, along with my own grandparents, that helped shape what I know to be in our culture and what to do, and really in particular, what in our families, what we have the right to. I also had one of my grandmothers, my dad's mom, would always tell me about our family tree. And my mom's mom was the same way, but it was my mom's oldest sister that would tell me to sit down and I have things to tell you. And she'd tell me family tree. And I thought that it was just important to know family tree. And it wouldn't be till I got a little bit older that I realized that because I know the tree, then I know where our connections are and how we're connected to the mask or the rattle or different names that we have the right to. And also from those people learning how to access in the appropriate manner, like not just taking anything, but approaching and talking to the right people. Then when my dad was passed away, and one of our names was being used in was being put on somebody. And I was sitting there and I thought, oh no, like my dad's not here. He's passed away and my grandparents are passed away. I got nobody but me. And now I have to go over and say something to them. And it was like a really lonely feeling. And I was just thankful that Kalila was with me. And Kalila's really good, as you know, with culture and is good with the language. But it was the first time since my dad had passed away that I actually had to stand up and go and say something about a name and what the other person has a right to. So I went over and, I did the work that needed to be done, but I felt really alone in that moment, just thankful that I had my daughter standing with me, and everything has been good since then. But, we'll see. We'll see when somebody wants to pass a name along, because we actually said that you can't. We weren't disputing that they had a right to the name, but they needed to come and talk to people. So we didn't stop it, but we let them know. So we'll have to keep an eye on that, I guess. And then that actually happened again to us in the summertime. Somebody was taking a really important name without any kind of protocol, and I talked to actually your Uncle Ray, who I've been working with Ray since 2008. And he always has said to me that, well, I'll come back to that after. So I told him what was happening, him and your Uncle Howard, who are really like my brothers. And I said, this is what's happening. And I need to do something because, I don't have my dad anymore. So they gave me some good advice. And I talked to one of my older brother cousins, and him and your Uncle Howard came with me and my family to a meeting with the other family. And we just put our truth on the table. And now we'll just wait and see what happens there. But we did everything that we were supposed to do. And I stood up in that meeting and gave our lineage and said who we are and why things went the way that they did, and actually showed why they didn't have a right to the name. But I also know what my dad said to us over the years is that, we have our way and our truth. And some people have different teachings, and that's something you just have to recognize. And in their way, they're probably doing what they think is right, but it's coming up against what we know to be right. So we have to stand up and say our truth. So I've been really lucky that along the way, I've had grannies that have taught me family tree, and I've had grandparents and parents that helped teach me what to do. But in the absence of them, I have had the good fortune through my dad and my mom, who have had relationships with Howard and their family, and Ray and George and your family, to be able to call upon them as family as well. Your Uncle Ray and I co-chair at the First Nations Summit, and I was selected in 2004, and Ray came along in 2008. And in 2010, I went to law school, and sometimes I would miss meetings, and your uncle would have to do all the chairing by himself. And he would tell me, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. And when I became a lawyer, he would say this to me, Leah, I'm your cultural advisor, and you're my lawyer. And I'd be like, I'm not a lawyer yet, Ray. And he said, don't worry. You will be. So Whenever anything legal comes up, I get the call and I tell him what I think. I don't give him advice as a lawyer. I just tell him what I think.
That's amazing. Yeah, I love that connection that we all share together and, have that commonality with all the people we love and you have the opportunity to work with. And yeah, just thinking of, the teachings and yeah, I was very much like you. I was very fortunate that I had the opportunity. My grandma Nora, my mom's mom was one of the biggest cheerleaders I had in my life, and she was such an amazing lady. And one of the things I think about quite frequently, a teaching that she shared with me was like about intentionality. And she would, always started off her day. She would light a candle and, say her prayers to Creator and ask for, wisdom, strength, and guidance as she like moved in through her work. And that's something I carry with me now in my adult years. And she always used to say too, like, you always be intentional with your words. You don't once they're said, you can't ever take them back.
We'll see him.
And so I always think of my grandma, and so usually, um, I always try to take that time to think about what I'm gonna say before I say it. And yeah, and that's kind of the things that came up for me as I got to hear your stories and hear your connections to your grandparents and like hearing the connections you have to Uncle Howard and to Uncle Ray and my dad. And so yeah, thank you for sharing and look forward to continuing on in our stories and continuing on and our shared love for all these amazing people. And yeah, Aichka.
Oh, see him.
And then in thinking about teachings and words of wisdom, I was going to ask you if you had any words of wisdom or teachings for our listeners here today.
I think because of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and the calls to action, all of your listeners have the responsibility to learn something. They have to learn something about the First Nations that are upon whose territory they reside or work. And maybe there was a residential school or an Indian hospital in their town or city. It's their responsibility to learn something about that. Murray Sinclair, late Murray Sinclair, former justice and senator, and just fabulous mentor and role model in our communities. He said once that our people did nothing wrong, and yet our people come to the table and roll up their sleeves and do the work. That's what we all do. So that's what your listeners have to do. They have to roll up their sleeves and learn something about what happened to and our First Nations people and Métis and Inuit people, to learn and understand. Like, we didn't ask for any of this, and we're still feeling the effects today. You just have to look at our healthcare system, especially in Duncan right now today. Like something crazy, like 80 people, not just First Nations people, 80 people in Duncan have died. So we're way past crisis for opioid use. And then in Duncan Hospital, I understand that a number of people, and not just First Nations people, have died from like blood infections, sepsis. So I understand there's going to be an investigation. Well, they have to investigate because when it happens to our people, in some cases, it's because our people don't receive the right care They don't receive enough care and they don't have access the way that Honitan people do. And we need to understand why that is. Well, there was the Indian Act that was made to separate our people from our land. It was essentially to take our people off our land so that settlers could have our land. And the responsibility for Indians was the responsibility of the federal government. So they take care of education and health, but they delivered it in ways that made our people second class. Our people got health care through Indian hospitals, or we got health care through a federal department where, like, Department of Immigration actually used to facilitate the healthcare for First Nations in the lower mainland. Department of Immigration doctors took care of our people. People don't understand that. So it all got into the legislation, the way that our people have been treated, and it's discrimination. That's what's happening to our people, and it's based upon legislation from way back. So there has to be changes in the institutions, and your listeners need to be ready to call those institutions to account to make those changes, like Duncan Hospital. And we knew, well, maybe it wasn't Duncan Hospital. Remember when that whole report came out, In Plain Sight? And that was based on an investigation at a hospital near Sartlip, because I remember the chief at Sartlip was the one who spoke out first, where the emergency room staff, nurses, and doctors would take bets on who, whether or not the people coming in were intoxicated or Indigenous. I mean, a whole investigation had to happen from that, and a whole report was written. Now, we could go look at the recommendations of the report and see that not everything has been followed. Indeed, I don't know that any of the recommendations have been followed, but they're going to be facing the same kind of thing at the Duncan Hospital. And I would think that's going to happen at Lions Gate as well. I understand that the same kinds of infections we're going through Lionsgate. In fact, even when our mother was in the hospital last month for over a week, I think. So there'll be investigations going on. And we have to ask ourselves, why? Why is there institutional racism? And how is it that we can make that change? We're all human beings. In all of our languages, the word for our own selves is human being. Like our Hualmuch, that's an Indian person, that's a human being. When we talk about, when we say our own people, sometimes they say the name of the place and they say Misteu. That's the people. And we have to remember that. So you have a responsibility, you have a duty, you have a duty to learn. You have a duty to learn about the people, and you have the duty to stand up and say something when you see something is wrong. In the same way that your parents and grandparents and my parents and grandparents instilled in us, when it's wrong, you have to stand up and say something. It doesn't matter how you feel. It doesn't matter if you feel scared, or it doesn't matter if you're the only one there, or it doesn't matter if they're not going to listen. You still have to do it. So I think our listeners have to remember to do that as well. And when they want to make changes in their organizations and they want to say they want to hire more Indigenous people, or they want to make changes, well, you have to talk to Indigenous people first. First and foremost, nothing about us without us. That's what our mantra is. We have to be involved in everything. So in healthcare or justice system, there has to be a way for our people to be putting their uh, advice or information in, so that they have a say in in what happens. I think that's really important. I have a friend, she used to say, look, we're trying to make all these changes in healthcare, but we're not just going to take the white car and paint it brown. We can't. It has to be a brown car like us. So we have to be involved. We can't just let them paint the white car brown. It's not going to help our people. So that's the other part about it. You can't just make a few, how do you call it, cosmetic changes and think that's going to fix everything, because it's not. All of this is deep rooted, and it's going to take some, essentially, those institutions need some therapy because they have to come to terms with, what they've been condoning and what they've been allowing to happen. And however the work goes forward, we all have to roll up our sleeves and do the work.
Haichka. Yeah, thank you for sharing. It's very, very powerful, and I think it's going to be really good for our listeners to be able to hear that. I know it's can be very difficult for a lot of people to confront, those travesties that have happened. Because it's for a lot of people, it's very, counterintuitive to what the perception of what it means to be Canadian. There's a lot of people who think that, around the world, there's that view of Canadians that we're all, kind and loving people, and um, so when we're confronted with the truth that has happened to our Indigenous people, that's very opposite from what we want to be perceived as Canadians, and so I think it's really good and thank you for sharing, and people to roll up their sleeves and kind of get involved in the process of truth and reconciliation, and let's continue to confront the truth and continue to move forward in reconciliation together, because we're truly all in this together.
We are. We are.
Thank you so much, and really appreciate you sharing your stories and sharing your teachings, and before we um, you know come to an end to our conversation, I'd just love to open the floor to you to be able to share with our audience, the amazing work that you're doing.
Hmm. I actually do a lot of different things. I am a member of the First Nations Health Council, representing the Vancouver Coastal Region. I am also a board member of the Land Advisory Board, representing all First Nations in Canada that are under the First Nations Land Management Act. So we each have land codes, and we manage our own Indian Reserve land. And I co-chair at the First Nations Summit, and that's the organization that represents First Nations in British Columbia that are part of the treaty process and are currently negotiating with the federal and provincial governments. And I'm a lawyer part-time. I help communities with governance issues, and I help Tsleil-Waututh with negotiation. I really think it's important for people to learn more about why there needs to be a treaty process, or what is this Indian land question. Nobody in There are some small treaties on southern Vancouver Island. There's an adhesion to Treaty 8 in the Peace River block, and there's the Nisga'a Nation Treaty Agreement. Then the BC treaty process came along in 1992, and negotiations started properly in probably around 1994. with First Nations that joined the process. And that's 30 years. And we've got, I don't know, 8 treaties to date. And it's really important for people to understand why there need to be treaties. There needs to be an accounting for the land that was taken. And if we don't negotiate, we end up in the court, we litigate. And you can see that in the most recent case, which is Cowichan. And Cowichan on Vancouver Island, and having to do with land in the Richmond area on the mainland, where there are other First Nations too, of course. So it's really complicated and it's not simple to understand. But nowhere in the decision, or nowhere the Cowichan intention, or even in the BC treaty process has it ever been said that individual people's fee simple title was on the table or was up for grabs. It is not. And that's a lot of fear mongering that's been happening about how the Cowichan are going to come and take over. It's not going to happen that way. There has to be some kind of negotiation, obviously. And there are a number of parties at the table, so there's still a lot of work to do. And also, it's still a matter before the court because a number of the parties are appealing, so it will go forward to the BC Court of Appeal. And whomever wins, if Cowichan wins again, I'm sure the governments will appeal it again. So it'll end up in the Supreme Court of Canada, which is good because Supreme Court of Canada, that's where the laws will get made. Those are the the decisions that we rely on in negotiations or in treaty or in other pieces of litigation going forward. What the courts have already decided is what we'll rely on. So it's good that it's going farther because it needs to be defined. People need to be shown what is possible, because obviously we're not able to sit down across the tables from each other and determine that. You only have 8 treaties or something from negotiating tables. Cowichan is one of those tables. So something has to give, and it really means that people have to come to those tables with their sleeves rolled up, ready to do the work. But there also has to be good communication to the general public so they aren't afraid that some First Nations are going to come and take their land, because I'm telling you, that's not happening. And all the other pieces of work that I do it's important for First Nations to take control of what they can. That being like Indigenous and Tsleil-Waututh, we have land codes. That means we manage our own Indian reserve land. And that's important. We've taken off 25% of the Indian Act. So that's good. But each of our nations aren't in the treaty process. So the only way to get totally out of the treaty process, the only way to get out of the Indian Act completely is to be in the treaty process and to get to a final agreement. And I think the decisions that will come out of Cowichan in the appeal, and probably when it goes to Supreme Court, are going to be things that will help us figure out how we're all here to stay on this land, and how it is that we can share authority or jurisdiction over land. If you think about it, in the greater Vancouver area, there are how many municipalities? There are how many different order levels of government, like the water district, the regional district, municipalities, First Nations. I mean, there are all these different levels of jurisdiction, and still the world doesn't end. The world doesn't end because you give the Indians a break or because you negotiate and return some land to them. The world doesn't end. We've lived beside each other for over 100 years. Obviously, we know that each other is not going anywhere. We need to figure out how to work together. And that is the reconciliation that our communities are striving for.
Mm, beautiful. Yeah, Haichka, thank you for sharing. And I really hope that our community can really, take in and absorb, the words you're sharing and, take to heart, that, we're all here together, and I think that's, one thing that a lot of our people really do know and understand. And my grandma Nora always did share that. She said, our Siya, our friends, who've settled in our territory. I'm like, they're not going anywhere. Like our people aren't going anywhere. She always used to say, now we need to learn how to coexist together.
So, yeah,
Mm,
exact words of my grandfather, too. We were lucky, George. We had such beautiful teachers.
the best. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Leah, for taking the time to come and sitting with me today and sharing in this conversation. I want to take a moment to thank our listeners for coming and listening to mine and Leah's conversation and hearing our stories and listening to the teachings that have been shared with us and the opportunity for Leah to be able to share teachings with all of you. And I thank you all so much, and I hope to catch you all in the next one. Take care, everybody. Aichka. Ewe.